Am I live? I don't know if I'm live. Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. We're going to do just a midweek Bible study refresher. I know it seems really weird us cooped up in our house. So now that we're cooped up in our houses, it's really on us to, it's always been on us to feed ourselves spiritually. And so you're going to need to do that in the comfort of your own homes. The good news is we all have a Bible. Hopefully you have a Bible. If you don't have a Bible, let me know. I'll get you a Bible. But the Bible's a tough thing. It's a tough book to read. It's a tough nut to crack. It's so big and there's so many things in the Bible. What I'd like to show you today is the secret to understanding the Bible. It's not the secret, but it's a cool trick to understanding the Bible, putting all the pieces of the Bible into the right place. Like I said, the Bible is not really just, I didn't say this yet, but I'm going to say it now. The Bible is, it looks like a book, but it's really a ton of different books. It's 66 books crammed into one. And I don't know if they just save on printing to just do it that way, but we just put it all into one book, and it can be very intimidating because it's written by a bunch of different people. It spans a couple thousand years, and there's different genres, all sorts of different things in there. So let's put the Bible, the trick is to make this big intimidating thing a much smaller thing, smaller in the sense that, like, you know, I can understand the small thing. I get lost in a big thing. So let me break down what the Bible is right here. It is Wednesday, and this is a whiteboard. So I thought I'd call it Whiteboard Wednesdays. They will start with W. So what is the Bible? I'll draw a picture of the Bible. I like pictures. There it is. That's not it, though. That's not the secret. So Jesus talks about, everybody talks about the Bible when they referred to the Bible. They never say the Bible in the Bible. They never say that word Bible in the Bible, if that makes sense. How Jesus referred to it was the law, the prophets, and the writings. Like there was 3 sections for him. And of course, in Jesus' day, there was just what we call the Old Testament. So there was less books of the Bible for the kids to memorize and everything. There was just less of the Bible. The New Testament hadn't been written yet. But they called it the law, the prophets, and the writings. Now here's a beef that I have, a little gripe I have with our English Bibles. And that is our English Bibles rearranged all the books of the Bible. Like when Jesus read his Bible, they had scrolls and everything back then. But there was a particular order, and the order was law, prophets, writings. Then there was a guy named Jerome, really early on, who wrote a Latin version of the Bible, like 400 or so AD. And he, for whatever reason, rearranged all the books of the Bible to make them easier for Greek speakers to understand and Latin speakers to understand. So he kind of put the whole thing in kind of chronological order. He lumped genres together, and he put the authors together, but he mixed up the whole order of law, prophets, and writings. And ever since, the King James kind of cemented it. They screwed up the order, basically. Now, we still have all the Bible, that's all fine, but the order's weird, and because the order's weird, it's hard for us to understand. So let's think of it in terms of law, prophets, and writings. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before. Jesus says that phrase a few times. They say it all throughout the scriptures. Is anybody here? Is anybody around? Okay, hey everybody. So we got these 3 areas here. Now, like I said, if you want to get a big picture of the Bible, like I said, there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I'll put a line through the whole thing. How am I doing on time? What time am I at already?
3:30.
I feel like I've already babbled on way too long. So here's the Old Testament up here. And we'll do New Testament down here. Can you read that? Okay. What was part of the law? Well, and in fact, let me do this. Here, I got this from an Old Testament scholar, Dr. Miles Van Pelt. So the very first book of the Bible is Genesis. That's the opening to the whole thing. It's like the introduction. So Genesis kind of stands on its own. Same thing at the end. What's the very end of the book? I even called it a book, didn't I? What's the end of the Bible, the scriptures? Revelation. This thing is wobbling. Can you guys hear that? Look at that. I need to get a better easel. Okay, Genesis, Revelation. In the middle, law, prophets, writings. The law was Genesis, Exodus, I'm just going to give abbreviations, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Again, this is how Jesus would have read his Bible. The prophets, and it seems weird to us that they would call it this, but Joshua was in one of the books of the prophets. Joshua, Judges. Now in our Bibles it goes Ruth, but that's not, Ruth was in the writings. And this is important. Again, I think the Hebrew ordering is important. What else did they have? Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, Kings. These are the really boring books. When you start getting in here, it gets boring. Actually, when you start getting through here, it gets a little boring. But that's besides the point. And then there's the people that we call the prophets. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. And then in the Hebrew, they just call them the 12. 12, whoops, I just wrote 12. 12, it's the 12. These are the minor prophets, like the Habakkuk and Hosea and Amos and Zephaniah, Zechariah, all them. They just said, that's the 12. A lot easier for their kids, like I said, to remember the books of the Bible. Then they had the writings. These are the nice ones, the ones we take comfort in, Psalms, Proverbs. There's Job, Ruth, Lamentations. Again, we stick these all in weird places. Daniel's actually over here. We threw him in with the prophets, but he's actually one of the writings. What else is there? Ecclesiastes, all the rest of them. All those wisdom books and stuff like that. Oh, and Chronicles, that's an important one. Chronicles. 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They just call it Chronicles. We call it 1st and 2nd because the scroll was too big, so they had to put it over 2 scrolls. But it's really just Chronicles. So this was the Old Testament. The law, the prophets, the writings. That's how Jesus understood it. And how we understood the law portion was, this is the covenant God gave us. So the covenant was given through who? Again, Genesis is the introduction. Who shows up in Exodus? Anybody know who shows up in Exodus? Moses. And the covenant is given through who? Moses. Okay, so we have Moses, we have the teachings of Moses, and we have the life of Moses. So Moses' life, his birth, his life, and his teachings. And the covenant is given through Moses. Then there's the prophets. This is the history section. This is what happened with God's people. Is all recorded in the prophets. That's why they call Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings part of the prophets. The prophets they considered was the history of the covenant. The covenant was given, and here's how it played out. And then this whole section, writings, was like life, how to live your life, like application, let's say. This is how are we living out this covenant that God gave us through Moses. Well, these books will tell you how to do it. And this is why people like to preach through this part of the Bible. This part's a little bit tough, gets a little bit gruesome in the histories, but in the application part, it's very easy. At least for me, like I say, because I can just open up Psalms, very easy application. Proverbs, easy application, stuff like that. It's very easy. Law, prophets, writings. Now, what happened with the New Testament? Well, the same thing. They wanted to do the same thing. Now, we have a new covenant. The new covenant is given through who? A guy named Jesus. Right? So what are the books about Jesus' life, teachings, and really death and resurrection? But Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. What's the story of the history of the covenant going out into the world? Acts. We just have one of those. And then the writings. We have Paul's letters. I'm just going to write Paul's letters because I'm running out of time. Hebrews. Peter wrote a couple letters. 1st, 2nd Peter. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. We got Jude. I feel like I'm missing one. James. Sorry, James. And then finally we cap it off with the book of Revelation. So uh, we have the covenant with Moses, and at the end of each one of these sections in the Hebrew Old Testament, again, the ordering is important. You won't see this in the English Bibles, but with the Bible that Jesus would have read, at the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of the section of the law, Moses said, look for one greater than Moses. Somebody greater than Moses is going to come. At the end of both Kings and the 12 minor prophets, the last minor prophet would have been Malachi, same as in ours. He says what? Look for someone greater. The temple is here, but look for someone greater than the temple. The prophets are here, look for someone greater than the prophets. Moses was here, look for someone greater than Moses. The end of Chronicles, that's actually the temple there, where they rebuild the temple and say, you know what, this new temple that we built is not what we were waiting for. Look for something greater than the new temple, greater than the old temple. What happens with the New Testament now all of a sudden? Here's the person that all the law, the prophets, and writings are pointing toward. And then we have the books of that covenant. God giving the new covenant through Christ. The covenant history with Acts. So the history in the Old Testament starts with the whole world, and it kind of boils right down, ends up in Jerusalem, right? What do we see with Jesus and the early church? Starts in Jerusalem, and what does it do? Goes out to the whole world. So we see this kind of crunch in the Old Testament, and then the expansion in the New. And then, how do we live out this covenant? That's where we have that whole section of the Bible. So, that's the Bible really in a nutshell. Law, prophets, and writings. The Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Cool thing is, in Genesis, we have the creation. I'm almost done here. You don't have to tune in for too much longer. God institutes the marriage in chapter 2. So chapter 1, you could say, is creation. Chapter 2, marriage. Chapter 3, what happens? Satan comes in and kind of ruins things. What do we have at the tail end of the book? And this is the cool part. We have, in chapter 19, 3 chapters from the end of Satan. So Satan's done. Chapter 20, what do we have? We have the penultimate marriage. The marriage of God and his people coming together. And in chapter 21, what do we see? We see the new creation. So everything gets wrapped up in a nice, neat bow. It's not neat. It's a really messy history. But you can see how everything gets finalized and perfected right there at the very end. So, really easy way to look at the Bible. Kind of a nice way to categorize it so you're not so intimidated with the whole thing. It's much easier to see when I'm reading, where am I at, where I'm reading. Where is very important. So, yeah. Any questions or anything? No questions? Well, this has been the first Whiteboard Wednesday. We'll see you next week for another super helpful secret trick to understanding your Bible. You can do it at home. So, we'll see you then.